Hey again everyone, and welcome back to the channel for another installment in our new figure showcase series, where we take a look at the newest figure or 6-scale piece I'm adding into my collection. And this episode is really special, or at least I hoped it would be, as we're going to be taking a look at the Batmobile from the 2022 Matt Reeves Batman film by Jazzinc. So again, was extremely excited to have this in hand. And my last 6-scale vehicle review, if you watched it, of the Hot Toys DeLorean Mark II, ended up being cut short once I uncovered the broken axles. So I was hoping this would go a little bit better. So normally I tend to skip past the box, not because they aren't amazingly well done, but more because I want to get into the figure itself or the piece. Here I do have to talk about the sheer size of this. I have two other vehicles in my collection, the original Dark Knight Tumbler and the Mark II Hot Toys DeLorean, and while those were big boxes, this one dwarfs them. And I wasn't honestly prepared for the size. My wife actually got the package, and the thing is massive, and it is a little hefty. Now, part of me did think that maybe most of it was packing, and that is true from a vertical point of view, but they were pretty efficient in how they packed this away, so it does claim a lot of real estate. So look, I was extremely excited when the new Batman movie came out, and fortunately, when I did finally manage to see it, I wasn't disappointed. Sadly, on the figure front, I still don't have my Hot Toys Batman figure in hand. I keep on waiting for the invoice to drop from Sideshow, but nothing yet. So at least now we're getting an opportunity to take a look at the vehicle. So in the movie, this version of the Batmobile makes a striking appearance, from the silhouette in the rain with the insane engine sounds and light-up features, right, as the Penguin and his henchmen watch, to the entire, all the way to the chase sequence where it really kind of shows off. It was just a beast. And while I've seen some arguments that it's nowhere near as iconic as some of the others that have come before, I love the overall look and the menacing look of that front grille. The other funny thing here, at some point both Hot Toys and NR teased that they would be making this vehicle. Hot Toys even showed a version at a Batman themed or Flash themed event, but never moved forward with it. That's not to say they can't, but it would be a ways off. And the NR one, based on some statements, seems dead in the water. So for now, this is the only version we're getting. So let's take a look at what we got from Jazzinc. And I'm going to preface this by saying I did this review over a few days, so I'm going to share my initial thoughts with you and then kind of go into the evolution of those once I've had an opportunity to really handle the car and just look at the details a little more carefully. I don't think it's going to be a negative review, but there are definitely some issues. So let's just get into it. And look, as anticipated for a vehicle, there's not much included here besides the car. Although you do get a power adapter for the light up and sound features, a remote control, and an international adapter, as well as a small vial to load up the distilled water for the smoke exhaust feature. So without getting into those details, I'll give you my first overall impressions during the unboxing. And again, straight out of the box and just putting the vehicle down and taking everything again, first thing that surprised me was the size. For some reason, when compared to the Tumbler or some of the other vehicles, I just assumed this version would be a little bit more streamlined, but it is a total beast. That's the immediate first impression out of the box, and I am prepping myself for a lot of "that's what she said" jokes, but it is massive. And as a slight aside, I did get a little worried because I also have the '89 Batmobile from Jazzinc on order, and I think it's definitely going to be bigger than this, so my immediate reaction is, where am I going to put these? I do have Module cases on order and layouts that I had planned for these, but suddenly the scale of these is really hitting me. And when I took this out of the box and set it down, I'll be honest, I reached out to Fabs from Fabs Figures and Ryan from Mr. Mom Collectibles, and I told them this thing looks really good. And you know, I'm impressed. That's how much of a striking first impression I got. So without looking closely at the details, the overall appearance, it's impressive. It's a beautiful vehicle. Feels simple, although I think that's a little bit of a misdirection, as you do start seeing some details pop here and there, but it's really basic. It's a souped up muscle car with the nice fins added in. Now, I got the clean version, and I do like the slight weathering that they added, and while the big thing I do have to give them credit for, there were some pictures of some people that got the earlier releases that showed fingerprints, and we're not talking little smudges. We're talking about fingerprints that appear to be like caked into the paint itself. So fortunately mine is pristine, so I was very happy with that. One other thing I did notice as I was taking the car out of the packaging and setting it down on the table, the front wheels seem very loose. And you can almost see it in the image, in the video, with them flexing up and out a little bit. I tried to look at the mechanism inside and couldn't really see what was going on at first, but it looks like the wheels aren't independent brackets. It's just something that makes me concerned in the long run with the forward axles, and hopefully they won't experience some type of permanent deformation. So those were the initial takes, but I wanted to sit on the vehicle and kind of take apart pause on the review to just give some time to really look at the piece overall and just get a feel for it and really start to examine the details over a couple of days. So after some time examining things, let's start with the paint app. And it looks okay. I do like the matte black. It is a fingerprint magnet, I'm warning you right now. I noticed that anytime I handled it, there'd be a smudge. Now the fingerprints do come up with like a cloth, but it's a little annoying, so just a word of advice, handle with care. And I do think while the matte is nice, I don't know that it's totally screen accurate, especially based on some of the pictures we'll see later. Now, the hints of weathering are nicely done with a bit of dry brushing. Nothing crazy, but it adds a little bit of detail on an otherwise fairly straightforward paint job. So maybe you'll think this is unfair to do, but I did go back and found the picture of the Hot Toys prototype, and I'm going to put a clip on showing it. And that was shown at that exhibition. And look, maybe it's unfair because that is an unproduced vehicle, but I wanted to see what they were showcasing. And the paintwork on theirs is significantly different. Granted, I opted for a clean look, so I expected something more on the pristine side as opposed to the model shown by Hot Toys, which is pretty beaten up. So I will look around to see what the weathered version looks like from Jazzinc. Is it fair to compare? Maybe not. But I do think the paint apps on that Hot Toys Proto looked insanely good. And honestly, they looked better. So just an observation, and maybe a little hard not to compare and think, for the cost of this Jazzinc version, could the paint apps have been better? Now, as you're handling it as well, the vehicle does have some nice heft to it, and I think one of the fears I had was that it would feel cheap, potentially like Mattel vehicles or something like that you'd get from a company like that. Fortunately, that's not the case, and it does feel comparable to the vehicles I got from Hot Toys. So let's get into the details a little bit more in depth, and I'm going to start with the highlights for me. So first up, the engine. While most of the vehicle seems really simple with nice lines, the engine is a work of art. There are so many details here that just stand out, from the nice plastic central cover to the side cylinders, all in a nice matte black with silver detailing, and the massive exhaust system cradled on a welded cage. Just really impressive and well done. Maybe the only thing here would have been to incorporate some moving parts into the engine, but at the end of the day, probably not necessary. But from a scale perspective, I think this is without a doubt the highlight of the entire vehicle, and it's a credit to Jazzinc, so I do have to give them credit for that. Now, looking at the interior, because I'll also admit the dashboard looks pretty impressive. It is a muscle car, so it doesn't have the electronics that are necessarily associated with some of the other versions of the Batmobile we've seen in the past. So much simpler. But I like what Jazzinc did here. First of all, the dashboard lights up, which is awesome. And second, while I think the dials are all stickers, they covered them with a nice plastic like a real car would have, so it adds to the realism. Throw in the gear shifter and some of the other details, and it's just amazing. Steering wheel looks good as well. Paint apps are decent, although there are some smudges on the bar at the center console that could have been better. Seat has some good detail to it, although it's nothing crazy. And while the pedals look good with the silver finish, it honestly looks almost a little bland and almost like an afterthought. Now, the other side, I'm glad to see that Jazzinc updated this, because the first images were always a little blah with the tanks seeming to lack some detail. Now, these are nicely painted as well, and you even get an additional set of canisters in a nook on the passenger side that are really, really nice. The only lackluster element here is this panel on the rear of the passenger seat that in the movie had the dials, which I'm guessing had readings for the canisters. It's just a sticker here. While not really noticeable, it just seems a little cheap, and again, for the cost, I don't know that stickers were warranted. And I think that's where things are going to take a bit of a turn on this, because we have to talk price point with this piece. And I think this could have even been an opportunity for a lit up display. The other thing, if you watch the movie, there is some detail lacking on that canister side with some hoses and connections that just aren't recreated here. You can probably argue that it's nitpicking, but at the cost for this, I feel like that's warranted. That kind of criticism is warranted. Now, the doors also have a nice pattern on the interior paneling, so that's another plus, and I'm happy to say that the door closes nicely on mine with no appreciable issues. So I'm pretty happy with the fit so far. Next item to discuss has to be the detailing on the hood intake. Again, a ton of nice details with the intake louvers and the pipes visible on the sides. Just a really nice detail and nice work overall with decent paint apps. And I love that it adds another element. to what could have been a very simple hood. Not that a bare hood would have been bad, but it's just a nice accent. And it even leads to the clamps that hold the hood closed, painted in a nice silver, and then the clear plastic windshield as well as the windshield wipers. Now this might seem like another nitpick, but one of the wipers on the passenger side is actually propped up from the windshield, so it's not connecting. It's not a deal breaker at all, but it's going to be a pet peeve that's probably going to bother me in terms of fitting issue. Now, another major issue, and we'll see this with the lighted portion of the review, the louvers on the hood are really tightly placed with minimal gaps between them. In the movie, I feel like these were open a little bit more, and we actually saw that in the Hot Toys prototype as well. With the lights off, this looks good, but I think that's going to be an issue when I turn the lights on and turn the lights off to see kind of how this illuminates. And then look, of course, we get to the front of the car with the oversized bumper and low profile look with the headlights. From the front, this thing looks menacing. I mean, the bumper alone looks like something you don't want to mess with. But the appearance overall is just impressive, especially considering how stocky the car is. The front still makes it look streamlined, but it has that heft to it. So that's a good job. You can see some marks on the interior though, which at first I was kind of concerned about, where the bumper hits the vents. I was able to put a cloth in there and it looks like it's just dust. Not great, but at least something that I can clean and take care of. The other annoying thing I noticed and wanted to flag is the lower portion of the car. So you have the footbar, which is actually really sturdily applied, feels nice and solid, but right in front of it on both sides you have that side exhaust, and in that opening shot of the movie with it, these light up with the strobes of flame shooting out as well. So again, I think that's a missed opportunity for a light up feature. And second, these feel really cheap. Like, you can see me messing around with them here and they're not sturdy at all. Look, I'm not going to be throwing this thing around, but it feels like a break waiting to happen. And this is where I was feeling like there was something off as well. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I looked at the Batmobile scenes in the movie. I rewatched those. I got some pictures of the vehicle on display during premieres and events. And that's where I realized there's an issue with the chassis. The underside has this extra bit of material starting at the bumper and going past the doors. And you can see it specifically on the side exhaust, where you have this added material here. And the foot bar is actually attached to it. So there's an added layer that I don't think the real car had. And the detailing on the exhaust should have been a lot more fine, right? There should have been a lot more finesse there. You can see it on the images from the actual vehicle that this thing had a lower profile. And what I think it should have been a slimmer profile. I'm not sure if Jazzinc added the material to make it work for them, but now that I see it compared to the actual vehicle, I think that's a major issue with the chassis. And even in the movie and the images, you can see that the line of the footrest and the underside of the body should be closer to the mid-height of the wheels, but they're actually hanging lower. So again, going back to that Hot Toys Proto, they actually got that chassis right on there. So this has to be one of the biggest disappointments, especially at this price point. And then we have to go back to the front wheels. So I couldn't get the camera in to really get a clean shot, but what I did do is I did flip the vehicle around, put it on a towel like I did with the DeLorean to get a closer look. But there does seem to be a metal bar in the front axle that connects to a swivel joint that lets you move the wheels back and forth. My issue is there's a ton of vertical play on these, and the wheels feel loose, and when you drop the vehicle down on them, you can see that joint flex upwards, and you get a very small gap between the chassis and the tire. Metal bars should help with rigidity, but I just feel like the tires are too loose, and that feels like it's going to become an issue over time as the vehicle rests on them. BVS Batmobile, I think, as we all know, had some issues with those, and I'm just worried this may require kind of those props as well. And I hate to say it because at first I didn't notice it either, but the rear wheels are actually loose as well. And I mean, was he trying to recreate shock absorbers or some kind of suspension system? I just feel like it's another potential issue, and I would have wanted those tires to be a little bit more rigid because they are loose at this point, and that's an issue. So look, light up features next, because these are huge for a vehicle like this. So first thing first, looking at the jet exhaust with the smoke feature, pretty awesome. I like it. It's nice and bright, and I like the smoke coming out. It is a little gimmicky, sure, but it is a nice feature, although I think I would have liked an option to just turn on the light without the smoke feature. Now, the rear lights, that was a really distinctive look as well, and I think Jazzinc captured that well. Now, front of the vehicle, headlights look great. They're easily a highlight, but as expected, the louvers on the hood aren't done well. And while you can see a hint of orange light underneath, it just doesn't pop like it did in the movie, and that's a fail for me. That's honestly a huge fail, especially at this price point and with a company that claims to really go for accuracy. The blue lights mimicking the flames on the side are good, and I like the pattern that they kind of have going, the pulsating pattern to give some vibrancy, and the dashboard lights up nicely. But again, I think there were lights that should have been added to the side exhaust and the rear passenger panel. So look, yeah, you're seeing me kind of do a bit of a live portion to this video, which I normally don't do with my reviews, but I kind of thought it merited this because I have to give you my final thoughts on this, and it's going to be a little bit of a longer discussion because, look, the big question is there's a cost to this vehicle. This vehicle isn't cheap, right? It was $14.99 plus then $321 shipping, so you're talking about $1,800, right? Plus, so not cheap at all. And I've seen the comments, right? And this is nothing against Yost, right? I've seen him show up on streams. I've seen his engagement with the community. I think that's a highlight of the company, and I think it's something that I admire from him. So nothing against him personally. I think he seems like a true fan, somebody like that is really trying to give us a product there. But it's hard not to look at the cost and then see all the issues, right? And look, you might look at me right now and say you're being ridiculous. It looks great. You're being super nitpicky. Nobody else is doing that, and I will respect that, right? If that's your opinion on that. I think we're all entitled to our thoughts. And look, I didn't set out to do a negative review. I don't think this is negative, but I think there are issues that I noticed that I think for me are going to be things I have to think about a little bit with this piece. I still have to sit on it a little bit to think about my long-term thoughts on it. But look, the first thing, and I said it at the start of the video, when I got this, first of all, you're impressed by the box, right? It's hard not to be. Then you pull this vehicle out and you put it on a table, and your immediate things, without looking at everything, it's impressive, right? There's no denying that it's impressive. It looks beautiful. Even now, I have it right next to me, and there's no denying it looks decent, right? That's the problem, though. It looks decent. And I think for the money that we're spending, I wanted it to be perfect. Now, am I being unrealistic with my standards? I think some of you are probably going to say, you know, Jazzinc is a smaller company. They're not Hot Toys, right? They're not, you know, Damn Toys. They're not 3-0, for example. So to hold them to those standards might be unjust. But I think when you're going to charge that much money for a vehicle, and look, I think one of the big selling points to Jazzinc, or that they've been claiming, right, especially if you look at their videos for the '89 Batmobile, are accuracy. And I think while this is decently accurate, the chassis is a big deal breaker for me, especially looking at the images from the actual vehicle. I think they cheaped out on the bottom. For whatever reason, whether they couldn't get the material to work, it looks like the chassis might actually like dip in and then come down again to give you kind of a lip that creates that more streamlined look. And I think they missed that. And you'll see it in the pictures, right? I showed the pictures during the review just so you didn't think I was completely out of it. For some of you, maybe that's not a deal breaker. For me, I think looking at the profile overall of the vehicle, it just, that extra lift just makes the vehicle feel a little blockier. And I think it impacts the streamlined version of it. And looking at the wheel again, right, the chassis hangs low compared to the wheels, especially to the front wheel, where if you look at the movie and if you look at the images, right, it should be a little bit higher and just give you a more streamlined view. To me, that's an issue. The light up feature at the front too, I think, listen, if he wanted to give you the option to move the louvers a little bit, that would have been great. But as it stands right now, you've got that light that barely shines through. You can tell that it's on, but it doesn't give you that glow that we saw in the movie. And for the price point, that's a deal breaker. I think that's an issue that should have been resolved. The engine is the highlight. The engine looks beautiful. I think even if he'd done a little bit more detail work, I'm not going to take that away from Jazzinc. I think that looks pretty stunning. But I have an issue with the chassis. I have an issue with the lights and the wheels. I don't like that the wheels are that loose, right? And the rear axle wheel, which I hadn't noticed at first, but when I was kind of moving the car around to do the final version of the review, I noticed. It's still on a sturdy metal rod, but the way the wheel sits in, it's almost like it's not fully engaged, or there's a little looseness to it. So it's, again, tipping in. What that does for the long term, the wheels are rubber-like material, so I don't think the wheels themselves are a problem, but this isn't a light vehicle, right? I've heard that the 66 is much heavier, but I think with the weight that this is putting on the wheels, and especially the front wheels, I can see them right now, right? They are splaying out a little bit. And you saw the mechanism, right? There's a solid bar, and then there's a joint that kind of links them to help them rotate, and they're moving up and down as well because that joint has some looseness to it. Maybe that's nothing. Maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing, but I don't like the looseness of that. That feels a little cheap on the wheels. And as a car, as a vehicle, 6-scale vehicle, I think that's another issue. It detracts a little bit from a lot of the awesome detail here, because there is detail. I have to give him credit. The dashboard looks great. I like the fact that the top of that dashboard has the details like the vent and everything. I definitely give him credit for that. But at the same time, there are just some little details there that are lacking. And it's funny. The first impression is awesome. Totally positive. But when you start getting into it, there are things that start to pick up. Even the front windshield, to be honest. I don't know how else he could have done it, but it looks cheap. It feels cheap. I think the biggest issue that I have is a lot of this I might have forgiven if it had been a cheaper vehicle. If we had been talking a Hot Toys vehicle at $700, $800, and then some, right? I probably would have forgiven a lot of those issues. Been like, oh yeah, whatever. You know, it's still an expensive piece. I'm not saying it's not, but at the cost he's asking for this, I think the question that each of us as collectors have to ask ourselves are, is it worth it? And look, I'm going to preface this. These are just my 2 cents, right? This is my impression and my feeling with my vehicle that I got here. And I didn't set out, I don't set out to buy stuff that I'm not going to like, right? I love the movie. That's why I got this version of the 22 Batmobile. But in hand, and after the initial positive, great impression had worn off, there are a lot of things here that, for the price point, the question for me is, was this worth the money that I paid for it? I have to be honest, I think the answer is no. Some of you might say nothing is worth that cost, and you might be right. For me, I think if this had been perfect, if those issues that I flagged, if the wheels had been perfect, if the extra material on the underside of the chassis had been perfect, if the front louvers on the hood for the exhaust had been done really well so that the light shone out, I think all that combined would have been a home run, right? But I think there were shortcuts taken here, whether it was because they had to or there were other issues. It's a little disappointing. I think the cost is too much. I think whether that's what it cost him to do it, so be it. But at that price point, I don't care if you're a small company, mom and pop shop, or if you're a Hot Toys company or an InArt, or any other company out there that's doing 6 scale, at that cost, I'm going to hold you to a higher standard, and I don't think this vehicle meets the standard, right? I criticized the DeLorean, so for anybody that thinks I'm just hating on Jazzinc, right, when the DeLorean, I even mentioned at the start of the video, that was a fail with the QA/QC issues that mine had. But the lights were good, but even then I was really disappointed, and that made my list of disappointments of the year. So maybe it's just 6 scale vehicles that there's an issue with, but I don't know. I think the price point for this is too high for what you're getting. That's just my 2 cents. If you've got this vehicle and you're happy with it, that's great. I wish I could share that enthusiasm, which I originally had. I had that really high enthusiasm for this, but unfortunately, the more I'm sitting with the piece, the more that's kind of waning a little bit. And now, honestly, I have to do some serious thinking, because I do have that '89 Batmobile on order, and I have to consider if I want to move forward with that. It's a lot of money, and yeah, the NRD too. I hate canceling. I haven't canceled things in a long time. Right? It's been years since I've canceled something, because I hate that losing an NRD like that, and especially for something like this. But the question becomes, am I going to end up getting that '89 Batmobile and have a similar reaction to it? I'm not sure. And is it worth taking that chance? I'm not sure. Listen, even with the loss of the NRD, the money that I would have spent on that '89 Batmobile will cover another 5 or 6 figures, right? 5 or 6 Hot Toys. Throw in an in-art maybe, right? So maybe 2 Hot Toys and an in-art, or I don't know. There's just, it's something I have to consider. I have some time to consider next steps on this. And even this vehicle, I have to be honest, the other question I asked myself, because I'm looking at that Hot Toys prototype when I was researching kind of this to do the review, I asked myself, if Hot Toys were to put that on pre-order, and this is not saying that they will, because chances are they won't, or they'll wait until the second movie or the third movie, but if Hot Toys were to put that vehicle on pre-order, would I look at the one I have right now, knowing I paid probably much more, probably double what Hot Toys is going to charge at that point, right? Or close to double. And the question is, would I be happy passing on that one and say, no, I'm satisfied with this one? I think for the first time, and this is just based on one picture, which maybe, again, you're going to say I'm being ridiculous, but yeah, I think the answer is I would be disappointed. And when I collect, usually even when it's Hot Toys to Hot Toys, when I decide if I want to get the newer thing, I look at my figures and I say, would I be disappointed if I missed out on that new one because I have the older one? And sometimes the answer is no, I'm happy with my older one. So here, I think there's a combination of items that are giving me pause. And again, the immediate first reaction is kind of at the window. I don't know, this was a tough one to do. I think anybody hates admitting that they spent a lot of money on something that's maybe subpar. And look, I am a big third-party collector. I'm sure a lot of you have seen my videos, and if you're asking, well, you give those a pass, well, they're cheaper, right? We're not talking about a $300 figure. We're talking about, you know, a $150 third-party figure that I know what I'm getting. So maybe that's the thing here. I should have expected something different, but at the price point, I expected something that was close to perfect, and there are just some issues here that I don't think meet that requirement. I think if the vehicle had been cheaper, if we had been talking about a Hot Toys priced vehicle at this point, a lot of those points I could overlook. But at the cost of this, including shipping, yeah, I don't think this is, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. And I hate to have this be, I didn't think this would turn into a totally negative review, but look, I'm always honest with you guys, and this is just my opinion. Again, you might think I'm being ridiculous, I'm being nitpicky, and if so, that's fine, right? I'm just telling you based on what I'm seeing here. Yeah, it's hard when you're feeling a little disappointed because you're expecting something. Maybe my expectations were my own fault, of course, but yeah, I think there are definitely some serious issues here. So look, that's just my opinion, my honest opinion. I don't think this is worth the money, and I think I have to give serious consideration to next steps in terms of whether I'm moving forward with the 89. You might say it's a tap out excuse, so be it, but I think with the amount of money that's required for that piece, I'm going to be expecting perfection again. And if this is a sign of what I can expect, I don't think it's worth the money. I just don't. Look, quality overall, I don't think it's a bad vehicle, but again, it's not an $1,800 vehicle. It should be much cheaper than that. And if it had been cheaper, much more forgiving. I think
I think it would have been a home run at that point. But at the price that they're asking for, my expectation is super high, and it just didn't deliver. So look, just my thoughts. I'm looking forward to the comments, and let me know your thoughts if you think I'm being ridiculous, if you agree with me. Listen, either way, right, positive or negative, I appreciate your input on this, because this was a tough video to make. It's definitely a little bit longer because there was so much involved with it in terms of the observations. But let me know your thoughts. Again, I appreciate you spending some time with me on this one. I wish this could have been a much more positive video than it ended up being, but look, I appreciate it. Again, thanks for giving me some of your time. And look, if you are enjoying the content and aren't completely, hopefully you don't think this is overly negative, because I think it's criticism of a product. But if you are enjoying the content, please consider dropping a like, again, commenting or subscribing if you haven't, and we'll touch base on the next video.